The scent of expensive cologne lingered in the elevator long after Phillips had stepped out. I stood there, frozen, my reflection in the polished steel doors showing a woman I barely recognized anymore. Professional blazer, hair pulled back in a perfect bun, the mask of efficiency I'd perfected over 3 years as his executive secretary. But my hands trembled as I clutched the manila folder containing tomorrow's itinerary. Australia. 7 days. Alone with him on a private island to evaluate a strategic property acquisition. I should have said no. Should have cited the dozen urgent matters requiring my attention in New York. Should have suggested Marco, his security chief, accompany him instead. But when Phillips Donovan looked at you with those ice blue eyes and said your name in that low, controlled voice that made even board members squirm, you didn't say no. You simply nodded and started packing. The elevator descended 53 floors to the parking garage where his Mercedes waited, black as his reputation. I'd been working late again, reviewing contracts for the Shanghai expansion, when he'd appeared in my office doorway at 9 p.m., jacket off, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that had no business looking that distracting on a man who terrified half the criminal underworld. "Still here, Miss Jameson?" he'd asked, though he knew exactly where I was. Phillips knew everything that happened in this building, in this city, probably in this hemisphere. "Just finishing the due diligence reports you requested," I'd replied, not looking up from my laptop. Looking at Phillips was dangerous. It made you forget things, important things, like the fact that he was your employer, like the fact that you'd sworn off men entirely after Marcus. Marcus. The name still left a bitter taste even 2 years later. The finance executive who'd seemed so perfect, so stable, so safe. Right up until I'd found him in our bed with his colleague, destroying 5 years of my life in a single afternoon. "You work too hard," Phillips had said, moving into my office with that predatory grace that reminded you he'd built his empire through means that weren't always legal, weren't always documented, weren't always bloodless. "Someone has to keep your appointments organized and your enemies confused about your actual schedule," I'd retorted before I could stop myself. His laugh had been unexpected, genuine. "Is that what you do, Miss Jameson? Keep my enemies confused?" "Among other things, Mr. Donovan. The formality between us was deliberate, necessary. Phillips and Madeline would have been too intimate, too dangerous. Mr. Donovan and Miss Jameson maintained the professional distance that kept me sane. "Pack for warm weather," he'd said, changing the subject with characteristic abruptness. "We leave for Australia Friday morning. 7 days on Whitehaven Island. The Castellano property." My heart had stuttered. Whitehaven Island. I'd researched it months ago when the acquisition first came up. Pristine beaches, luxury villa, completely isolated. No neighbors, no staff, no civilization within an hour's boat ride. "Shouldn't the acquisition team handle the site inspection?" I'd asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral. "The acquisition team hasn't earned my trust the way you have, Miss Jameson. Besides, I need someone who can see beyond the property's obvious value. Someone who understands strategy." Flattery wrapped in business logic. Phillips was good at that. Making you feel essential while backing you into corners you hadn't seen coming. Now, stepping out of the elevator into the garage, I spotted him leaning against the Mercedes, phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapid Italian to someone who clearly wasn't happy. He wore his power like other men wore cologne, invisible but unmistakable. At 42, he had the kind of presence that made younger rivals nervous and older ones respectful. He ended the call as I approached, his gaze traveling over me in a way that should have felt inappropriate, but somehow didn't, as though he were simply taking inventory of something that belonged to him. "Working late suits you," he said, opening the passenger door. "Get in. I'll drive you home." "That's not necessary, Mr. Donovan. I can take a cab." "I know you can. Get in anyway." The command in his voice left no room for argument. I slid into the passenger seat, surrounded immediately by leather and that damned cologne and the heat of his presence as he settled behind the wheel. "You're nervous about Australia," he observed as we pulled out of the garage. Not a question. A statement of fact. "I'm concerned about being away from the office for a full week during the Shanghai negotiations." "Lie better, Miss Jameson. You're nervous about being alone with me." My breath caught. "Mr. Donovan." "Phillips." He said it quietly, firmly. "For the next week, you'll call me Phillips. We're going to be sharing close quarters. Formality becomes exhausting. Formality is appropriate. Formality is a shield. And I'm curious what you're protecting yourself from." I stared out the window at the Manhattan streets blurring past, refusing to answer. Because the truth was too dangerous to admit, even to myself. That I'd spent 3 years fighting an attraction to this man that grew stronger with every late-night strategy session, every accidental brush of hands, every moment his ice-blue eyes lingered on me a second too long. "I researched the island," I said instead, changing the subject. "The Castellano villa has been in their family for 40 years. Why sell now?" "Old man Castellano is dying. His children are idiots. They need liquid assets more than they need sentimental real estate." Phillips's voice was matter-of-fact, businesslike. "The property is worth $30 million. I'm offering 22. That's a substantial discount. That's leverage. They're desperate. Desperate people make poor negotiators. The casual ruthlessness shouldn't have been attractive. I'd seen him dismantle competitors, destroy rivals, crush obstacles with the same cold efficiency. But there was something compelling about a man who knew exactly what he wanted and took it without apology. "And what do you want from this property?" I asked. "It's remote, isolated, not exactly prime commercial real estate." His smile was slight, dangerous. "Maybe I want somewhere private, somewhere away from enemies and obligations and the constant performance of power." Phillips Donovan doesn't take vacations. No. But perhaps it's time I learned. We pulled up outside my apartment building in Murray Hill. Not expensive, but respectable. The kind of place a well-paid executive secretary could afford without raising questions. "Friday, 6 a.m., Phillips said as I reached for the door handle. "Private airfield in Teterboro. Don't be late." "I'm never late, Mr. Donovan." "Phillips." "Phillips," I corrected, the name feeling foreign and intimate on my tongue. His hand caught mine before I could exit, his touch sending electricity up my arm. "Madeline." The sound of my first name in his voice was like a physical caress. I pulled away quickly, too quickly, my reaction revealing everything I'd been trying to hide. 6 a.m., I repeated, and fled into my building before I could do something catastrophically stupid, like admit that I wanted him to follow me upstairs. The Gulfstream G650 was smaller than I'd expected for a man of Phillips's wealth, though calling any private jet small was absurd. I'd flown commercial exactly twice in the 3 years working for him, both times when he'd needed me to handle acquisitions he couldn't be publicly associated with. This was different. This was his personal aircraft. All cream leather and mahogany, a flying sanctuary that probably cost more than I'd earn in 10 lifetimes. "Coffee, Miss Jameson?" The flight attendant, a severe-looking woman named Carla, who'd worked for Phillips for 15 years, offered me a cup without waiting for an answer. "Thank you." I accepted it, noting that Carla knew exactly how I took my coffee. Of course she did. In Phillips's world, knowing details about people was currency. Phillips sat across from me, already working on his laptop, fingers moving across the keyboard with the same precision he brought to everything. He'd changed from his usual dark suits into something more casual but no less expensive. Black jeans, a charcoal Henley that emphasized shoulders that had clearly spent time in a gym. He looked younger like this, less like the mob boss who controlled half of Manhattan's underground economy, and more like a man who might actually know how to relax. "How long is the flight?" I asked, settling into my seat as the engines powered up. 22 hours with one refueling stop in Honolulu. Will arrive Sunday morning, Australian time. He didn't look up from his screen. Get some rest, Madeline. You'll need it. The use of my first name still sent a jolt through me. I brought work to review. Of course you did. Now he did look up, and there was something almost fond in his expression. Always prepared. It's one of the things I admire about you. One of the things? His smile was slow, deliberate. I admire many things about you, Madeline. Your efficiency, obviously. Your discretion. The way you anticipate problems before they become crises. The way you handle difficult personalities without losing your composure. He paused. The way you bite your lower lip when you're concentrating on complex problems. Heat flooded my cheeks. Mr. Donovan. Phillips. We agreed. Phillips, this isn't appropriate. Probably not. But we have 22 hours in close quarters. Might as well be honest with each other. I set down my coffee carefully, meeting his gaze. Honest about what exactly? About the fact that you're attracted to me, and that I find you increasingly difficult to resist. The bluntness of it stole my breath. I'm your secretary. You're my executive assistant, and that's not an answer. It's the only answer that matters. Professional boundaries exist for a reason. Boundaries, he repeated, closing his laptop and giving me his full attention. Is that what this is about? Or is it about your ex-fiancé? My stomach dropped. How do you know about Marcus? I know everything about you, Madeline. The background check I ran before hiring you was thorough. 5-year relationship, engagement announced, ended abruptly. You moved apartments, changed your phone number, deleted all your social media. That's not just a breakup. That's running from something. Anger sparked through my shock. You had no right. I had every right. I don't trust people I don't understand. And I needed to understand why a woman with your intelligence and capabilities was willing to work 80-hour weeks for me without complaint. Maybe I just needed the job. You needed the distraction. The all-consuming nature of working for me meant you didn't have to think about why your relationship failed or face the pain it caused. You threw yourself into being indispensable to me because it was easier than dealing with your own life. The accuracy of his assessment was infuriating. You're not my therapist, Phillips. No. But I am someone who understands using work as armor against personal pain. We're more alike than you want to admit. The flight attendant reappeared. We're cleared for takeoff, Mr. Donovan. Thank you, Carla. Phillips's gaze never left mine. As the plane accelerated down the runway, I forced myself to look away, to focus on the Manhattan skyline disappearing below us. But I could still feel his eyes on me, assessing, considering, seeing too much. He cheated on you, Phillips said once we'd reached cruising altitude. Not a question. I didn't answer. Didn't need to. My silence confirmed everything. Did you love him? I thought I did. Turns out I loved the idea of him more than the reality. He was safe, predictable, conventional. Everything my mother told me I should want in a husband. And now? Now I don't trust my judgment where men are concerned. Smart. Trust is dangerous. But attraction doesn't require trust, Madeline. It just requires honesty about what you want. And what is it you think I want, Phillips? He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, close enough that I could smell his cologne and see the silver threading through his dark hair at his temples. You want someone who sees through your professional armor to the woman underneath. Someone who doesn't need you to be perfect or accommodating or safe. Someone who matches your intensity instead of being intimidated by it. That's quite the assumption. Am I wrong? No. God, no, he wasn't wrong. But admitting it would be catastrophic. What I want, I said carefully, is to do my job, evaluate this property professionally, and maintain appropriate boundaries with my employer. Liar. The word was soft, almost affectionate. But I can wait. We have 7 days, Madeline. 7 days where you can't hide behind urgent meetings or other people, or the excuse of professionalism. Just you and me and whatever truth emerges when all the armor comes off. The promise in his voice made my pulse race. Or perhaps it was the threat. With Phillips, they were often the same thing. I spent most of the flight pretending to work while hyper-aware of his presence across from me. He made calls in Italian, in Russian, in what I thought might be Mandarin, conducting business across time zones with the same ruthless efficiency he brought to everything. Watching him work was fascinating and terrifying in equal measure. This was a man who moved billions of dollars with phone calls, who could destroy competitors before lunch and acquire their assets by dinner. And he'd just told me he found me difficult to resist. Somewhere over the Pacific, exhaustion finally claimed me. I woke to find a blanket tucked around me that I didn't remember putting there, and Phillips asleep in his own seat, his usually guarded expression softened in rest. He looked almost vulnerable like this, though I knew better. Phillips Donovan was never truly vulnerable. Even in sleep, he probably maintained control. Carla appeared with breakfast as we began our descent into Honolulu. 2 hours on the ground for refueling, she informed me quietly. Mr. Donovan has arranged a car if you'd like to stretch your legs. That won't be necessary. Actually, Phillips's voice was rough with sleep. Fresh air would be good for both of us. The car turned out to be another Mercedes, black and anonymous, driven by someone who clearly knew better than to make conversation. Phillips directed him to a beach on the North Shore, empty this early in the morning except for a few dedicated surfers. "Come on," Phillips said, opening my door before I could protest. "Walk with me." The sand was cool under my feet as I slipped off my shoes. Phillips had done the same, and there was something surreal about walking beside this powerful, dangerous man in bare feet, like we were ordinary people on an ordinary morning. "My father brought me here once," Phillips said, after we'd walked in silence for several minutes. I was 12. He'd just finalized a deal that made him millions, and instead of celebrating in the usual ways, he brought me to this beach. Told me that power without perspective turns men into monsters. Did you believe him? At 12? No. I thought power was the only thing that mattered, that fear and control were the same as respect. He paused, looking out at the ocean. Took me 20 years to understand what he meant. And now? Now I know that the most dangerous thing about power is how easily it isolates you. How it turns everyone into either an asset or a threat. How it makes genuine connection almost impossible because you can never be sure if people want you or what you can provide. The vulnerability in his voice caught me off guard. Is that why you're telling me this? To make me see you as human instead of just my employer? I'm telling you this because in 7 days, you'll see me without the armor anyway. Might as well prepare you for what's underneath. And what's underneath, Phillips? He turned to face me, the morning sun catching in his eyes and turning them almost silver. A man who spent his entire life controlling everything and everyone around him because the alternative terrifies him. A man who breaks rules and builds empires and destroys obstacles without hesitation. A man who just admitted to his secretary that he can't stop thinking about her, which might be the most dangerous thing he's ever done. My heart hammered against my ribs. Phillips, don't say it's inappropriate, or that we should maintain boundaries or any of the sensible things you're thinking. Not yet. Give me 7 days, Madeline. 7 days to show you who I am without the performance, and then you can decide whether what's between us is worth the risk. There's nothing between us. Another lie. You're getting worse at those. He reached out, his fingers grazing my cheek so lightly I might have imagined it. I can wait for the truth. I'm a patient man when I want something badly enough. Back on the plane, the air between us felt different, charged with something unspoken, but undeniable. I tried to focus on the property documents, on the financial projections, on anything except the man sitting across from me who'd just promised 7 days of truth. As we approached Australia, I stared out at the endless blue ocean below and wondered what I'd gotten myself into. Whether agreeing to this trip was the bravest or stupidest thing I'd ever done. Whether 7 days with Phillips Donovan would destroy me or save me. The island appeared below us like a jewel in the coral sea, all white beaches and turquoise water and dense green jungle. From the air, the Castellano Villa was barely visible. A sprawling structure built into the hillside with walls of glass that would offer panoramic ocean views. "It's beautiful," I breathed, pressing closer to the window. "Wait until you see it from the ground." Phillips's voice held something I'd never heard before. Not satisfaction or calculation, but something softer. Anticipation, maybe. Or hope. The landing strip was private, carved into the island's southern end. A Land Rover waited for us, keys in the ignition, a cooler of supplies in the back. No driver, no staff, just us and the isolation Phillips had promised. "The property manager stocked the villa yesterday," Phillips explained as we drove up the winding road. "Fresh food, wine, everything we'll need. He won't return until we call for pickup. Efficient. I pay for efficiency and discretion." The villa was even more stunning up close. Modern architecture that somehow felt organic, like it had grown from the island rather than being imposed upon it. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking an infinity pool that seemed to blend into the ocean beyond. Open-concept living areas with furniture that looked like art. And silence. Complete, profound silence broken only by the sound of waves and wind. "There are 4 bedrooms," Phillips said, carrying my luggage inside. "Take whichever you prefer. I'll take the master suite on the opposite end." The consideration surprised me. I'd half expected him to suggest we share a room, to push the boundaries he'd been testing since New York. Instead, he was giving me space, autonomy, choice. "Thank you," I said, selecting a room with a private terrace overlooking the beach. "This is perfect." "Get settled. I'll start dinner in about an hour, unless you'd prefer to cook?" I laughed despite myself. "You're offering to cook for me? I'm offering to not poison you with my limited culinary skills." The property manager left detailed instructions for the oven. "In that case, I'll supervise." His smile was genuine, reaching his eyes. "Smartest decision you've made all day." That first evening set a pattern that would define our week. We worked during the day, evaluating the property, reviewing financials, walking every inch of the villa and grounds. But at night, we cooked together, drank wine on the terrace, talked about everything except the growing tension between us. I learned things about Phillips I'd never known. That his mother had died when he was 15, leaving him to be raised by his father's world of violence and power. That he'd wanted to be an architect before duty demanded he take over the family business. That he read poetry in Italian and played piano and had a weakness for terrible action movies. "I can't picture you watching action movies," I said on the third night, both of us slightly drunk on excellent Shiraz. "What can you picture me watching?" "Documentaries about war strategy, foreign films with subtitles, maybe the news." "All work, no humanity, that's how you see me?" I considered this, the wine making me honest. "I see you as someone who doesn't allow himself frivolity because vulnerability feels like weakness." "And you?" He refilled my glass. "What do you allow yourself, Madeline?" "Not enough. I let Marcus convince me that my ambitions were unfeminine, that being good at my job made me less desirable as a partner. I spent 5 years making myself smaller to fit into his vision of what a woman should be. He was an idiot. He was conventional, safe, the kind of man my mother approved of." "Did you love him?" "I loved what he represented. Security, normalcy, a future that made sense. I convinced myself that was enough." "And when you caught him cheating?" The memory still stung. "I felt relieved, which tells you everything about our relationship. I was devastated, but underneath the devastation was this terrible relief that I didn't have to pretend anymore. Phillips was quiet for a long moment. I've never pretended with you, Madeline. From the day you interviewed, I saw exactly who you were. Brilliant, driven, ambitious, and I thought, here's someone who won't bore me. 3 years later, I was right. Is that why you hired me? Because I wouldn't bore you? I hired you because you're exceptional at your job. I kept you because somewhere along the way, you became essential to more than just my business. The admission hung between us, weighted with implications neither of us was ready to address. Instead, I changed the subject to the property, to acquisition strategies, to anything safer than whatever was building in the charged air. But that night, lying alone in my room with moonlight streaming through the windows, I couldn't stop thinking about his words. Essential. Not just to his business, but to him. The distinction mattered more than it should. The 4th day, everything shifted. We'd hiked to the island's highest point, a rocky outcropping with views that seemed to stretch to the edge of the world. The climb had been challenging, leaving us both breathless and exhilarated. Phillips had worn cargo shorts and a t-shirt, looking more human than I'd ever seen him, his usual armor of expensive suits left behind. "This is why I want the property," he said, gazing out at the endless blue. "Not for investment value or strategic advantage, but for this. For places that remind you the world is bigger than empires and enemies." "You're not what I expected," I said. "What did you expect?" "A monster. Everyone in New York treats you like one. The rival families, the politicians you've bought, even your own people. They're all afraid of you." "Good. Fear is useful, but lonely." He turned to look at me, really look at me, and I saw something vulnerable in his expression. "Yes, incredibly lonely." "Is that why you brought me here? Because you're lonely?" "I brought you here because you're the only person in my life who sees me as something other than a threat or an opportunity. You challenge me, question me, call me on my shit. Do you know how rare that is?" "Phillips, I'm going to kiss you now," he said quietly. "Unless you tell me not to." I should have told him no. Should have stepped back, maintained the professional boundaries we'd obliterated the moment we boarded that plane. But the truth was, I'd been waiting for this since New York, maybe since the day I'd met him. "Don't tell me it's inappropriate," I whispered. "Just do it." His kiss was nothing like I'd imagined. Not aggressive or demanding, but surprisingly gentle, almost reverent. His hands framed my face as though I were something precious, and I felt the careful control he maintained even in this moment of surrender. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. "This changes everything," he said. "I know. We can't go back to how things were." "I don't want to go back." His smile was fierce, triumphant. "Good, because I'm done pretending I don't want you." What followed was 3 days out of time. We explored each other with the same intensity we brought to everything else. Conversations that lasted until dawn. Touches that grew bolder. Kisses that deepened into something consuming. On the 6th night, we finally gave in completely. His bed, moonlight streaming through the windows, the sound of the ocean a distant pulse. He worshipped my body with a tenderness that shattered every assumption I'd made about him. Not the cold mob boss, but a man capable of devastating intimacy. "I've wanted this since the day you walked into my office for your interview," he confessed afterward, his fingers tracing patterns on my bare shoulder. "You wore a navy suit, and your hair was down. You looked terrified and determined and absolutely stunning. I was terrified. Everyone said you were dangerous. I am dangerous, but not to you. Never to you." I believed him in that moment, Believed that what we'd found on this island could survive the return to reality. That a man like Phillips Donovan could choose love over power. "Come back with me," he said on our last morning, both of us watching the sunrise from the terrace. "Not as my secretary, but as mine. Live with me. Build something real with me." "What about your world? The families, the obligations, all the reasons this could never work?" "We'll figure it out together. I'm done living for expectations and duties. I want to live for this. For us." It sounded like a fairy tale, and I wanted so desperately to believe in fairy tales. "Yes," I said, and sealed my fate with a kiss. The flight back to New York felt different. We sat together now, my head on his shoulder, his hand intertwined with mine. No more pretense of professional distance. We'd crossed that line and burned the bridge behind us. "I have a meeting Tuesday with the Valentino family," Philip said, scrolling through his phone. "Should take a few hours. Wednesday, I'll need you to brief the acquisition team on the Castellano property." "Wednesday works. What about living arrangements? Should I give notice at my apartment?" He looked up, something guarded flickering across his face. "Let's wait a week or two, make sure this transition is smooth." The first shadow of doubt crept in. "Phillips, what aren't you telling me?" "Nothing. I just want to be thoughtful about how we present this to the organization. There are protocols. Protocols for the boss sleeping with his secretary. Protocols for everything. It's how my world works, Madeline. You know that." I did know that, but something in his tone made unease coil in my stomach. Back in Manhattan, reality reasserted itself with brutal efficiency. Phillips's penthouse was everything I'd expected. Modern, masculine, expensive. But it felt sterile, unlived in, like a hotel suite rather than a home. "Make yourself comfortable," he said, already checking his laptop. "I have some calls to make. The time difference with Hong Kong." "I understand." But I didn't. Not really. Because the man who'd held me on the island, who'd promised we'd figure everything out together, had already retreated behind the armor of business obligations. The first real crack appeared on Tuesday. I was working in my office, my old office that Phillips insisted I keep for now, when Sophia, one of the junior analysts, knocked on my door. "Miss Jameson, there's someone here to see Mr. Donovan. Isabella Valentino. She says she has an appointment." Isabella Valentino, daughter of Antonio Valentino, head of the most powerful organized crime family in New York. Rumors said she was brilliant, ruthless, and engaged to be married to someone suitable. "Show her to the conference room," I said, trying to ignore the spike of jealousy. "I'll let Mr. Donovan know." Isabella was stunning. Dark hair, olive skin, wearing couture that cost more than my annual salary. She looked like the kind of woman who belonged in Philip's world, who understood its rules and requirements. "Miss Jameson." Her smile was cool, assessing. "I've heard about you. Philip speaks highly of his staff. Can I offer you coffee while you wait?" "No, thank you. This shouldn't take long. I'm just here to discuss some final details." Something about the way she said final details made my stomach drop. Phillips appeared then, and I watched his expression shift when he saw Isabella. Not pleasure exactly, but something like resignation. "Isabella, thank you for coming." His voice was formal, businesslike. "Shall we?" They disappeared into his private office, and I tried to focus on work. Failed miserably. After an hour, Isabella emerged alone, her expression satisfied. "Pleasure meeting you, Miss Jameson," she said, already on her phone. "I'm sure we'll be seeing more of each other soon." What did that mean? I found Philip standing by the windows, staring out at the city, his posture rigid. "What was that about?" I asked, closing the door behind me. "Family business." "Phillips." "Not now, Madeline, please." The please was what stopped me. Phillips never said please. The word itself was an admission of what? Stress? Fear? Guilt? Over the next week, he grew increasingly distant. Late meetings that ran past midnight, calls in Italian that he took in private, a tension around his shoulders that hadn't been there on the island. "Talk to me," I finally demanded on Friday night, cornering him in his penthouse. "What's going on?" He poured himself whiskey, didn't offer me any. Bad sign. "There are complications with the Valentino arrangement." "What arrangement?" "The families are consolidating power. There's been discussion of a marriage alliance." Ice flooded my veins. A marriage alliance. "It's political, Madeline. Strategic. It doesn't change what we have." "What we have? You're telling me you're marrying someone else and expecting me to what? Be your mistress on the side?" "It's not like that." "Then explain it to me. Make me understand how this doesn't destroy everything we built on that island." He set down his glass with precise control. "My world isn't like normal relationships, Madeline. There are expectations, obligations. The Valentino alliance would prevent a war. It would save lives." "So you're going to marry Isabella Valentino?" "The council is discussing it. Nothing is decided. But you're considering it. You're actually considering throwing away what we have for political convenience." "It's not convenience. It's survival. You don't understand the pressures, the constant threat." "Then help me understand. Don't shut me out and expect me to accept being a secret." We stared at each other across the expanse of his living room. The space between us suddenly a chasm I didn't know how to cross. "I need time," Philip said finally, "to figure out how to navigate this without losing you or triggering a war." "How much time?" "I don't know." That was when I knew. When I saw the truth in his eyes that he wasn't willing to say aloud. He would choose the alliance, choose his world, choose power over love, just like I'd always feared he would. "I should go," I whispered. "Madeline. No. Don't. Don't make promises you won't keep. Don't tell me we'll figure it out when we both know you've already decided." I left his penthouse. My vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. The fairy tale was over. The island had been an illusion. A beautiful lie we'd told ourselves before reality crushed it. For 3 days, I threw myself into work, maintaining professional distance even as my heart shattered. Phillips didn't push, didn't demand explanations. He simply let me retreat behind the armor I'd worn for 3 years. On Wednesday, the announcement came. Phillips Donovan and Isabella Valentino were engaged. The wedding would take place in 6 weeks, a union of 2 powerful families. Strategic, political, necessary. I stared at the email, feeling nothing. Numbness was safer than the alternative. That afternoon, I typed my resignation letter. Professional, courteous, giving 2 weeks' notice. It was cowardly, but I couldn't do this. Couldn't watch him marry someone else while pretending my heart wasn't destroyed. I left it on his desk after he'd left for a meeting, then packed my office. 3 years condensed into 2 boxes. Pathetic how little space a life occupied. I was almost to the elevator when his voice stopped me. "Running again, Miss Jameson?" I didn't turn around. "You made your choice, Mr. Donovan. I'm making mine. This isn't what I want, but it's what you're doing." I finally turned to face him, keeping my expression neutral. "I won't be your mistress, Phillips. I won't hide in shadows while you build a life with someone else. I deserve more than that." "I know you do. God, Madeline, I know. But if I don't do this, then don't ask me to watch. Let me go with whatever dignity I have left." Something broke in his expression. "I can't. You don't understand what you are to me. I understand perfectly. I'm important to you right up until the moment your world demands sacrifice. Then, I'm expendable. That's not true. Isn't it? Prove me wrong, Phillips. Choose me. Choose this. Choose love over power. The silence stretched between us, heavy with everything unsaid. And in that silence, I had my answer. "Goodbye, Mr. Donovan," I said, and walked into the elevator before he could respond. I didn't look back. Couldn't. If I saw his face, I'd break, and I needed to hold together long enough to disappear completely. I spent 2 days in my apartment before I realized I couldn't stay in New York. Everywhere I looked reminded me of Philip's, the coffee shop where we'd had our first real conversation, the restaurant where we'd celebrated closing the Shanghai deal, the park where I'd once seen him feeding pigeons, looking almost human. I needed to disappear. Completely. My friend Rachel from college had moved to Portland 3 years ago. When I called her, desperate, she didn't ask questions, just said "come" and texted me her address. I was packing when my phone rang. Philip's. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to his message against my better judgment. "Madeline, please, we need to talk. This isn't. I can fix this. Just give me time." Time. Always time. But time wouldn't change the fundamental reality. Phillips Donovan would always choose his empire over everything else, including me. I deleted the message and finished packing. The flight to Portland was uneventful. Rachel met me at the airport, took one look at my face, and pulled me into a hug. "That bad?" she asked. "Worse." She didn't push for details, just drove me to her apartment and let me collapse. For 3 days, I did nothing but sleep and cry, and try to remember who I'd been before Phillips Donovan consumed my entire existence. On the 4th day, I started looking for jobs. My resume was impressive, my references impeccable. I had offers within a week. Nothing as prestigious as working for Phillips, but honest work that wouldn't shred my heart daily. I was reviewing contract terms for a position at a tech startup when Rachel appeared with mail. "This came for you," she said, handing me a thick envelope. "Looks official." It was from Phillips's lawyer. My severance package. 3 years' salary, full benefits for a year, and a glowing letter of recommendation. All very proper, very generous, very final. And underneath it all, a handwritten note on his personal stationery. "Madeline, I won't insult you with excuses. I made my choice, and you made yours. But know that what we had on that island was real. The only real thing in my life in 20 years. You deserved a man who could choose you over everything else. I'm sorry I wasn't that man. I hope Portland treats you kindly. P." I read it 3 times before crumpling it into a ball, then smoothed it out and read it again. The bastard. Even his goodbye was perfect. Thoughtful, honest, devastating. I threw myself into my new job with the same intensity I'd brought to working for Phillips. My boss, a mild-mannered software engineer named Tim, was pleasant and utterly uncomplicated. He didn't make my pulse race or challenge me intellectually or look at me like I was the answer to questions he'd been asking his whole life. It was exactly what I needed. Safe, predictable, boring. I hated every second of it. 2 months passed. Then 3. I went on a few dates with a lawyer Rachel knew. He was nice, stable, interested. Everything I should want. I ended it after the 4th date because kissing him felt like kissing a brother. I was broken, I decided. Phillips had broken something fundamental in me, and I'd never be able to settle for ordinary again. Then, on a rainy Thursday in November, my world imploded. I was walking back to my apartment when I saw them. 2 men in expensive suits, standing by a black Mercedes that screamed East Coast money. They were watching my building with the kind of professional attention that made my blood run cold. Phillips's men. I turned and walked in the opposite direction, pulling out my phone to call Rachel. Before I could dial, someone grabbed my arm. "Miss Jameson." Marco, Phillips's head of security, appeared at my elbow. Mr. Donovan would like to speak with you. Tell Mr. Donovan I have nothing to say to him. It's important. Please. The please surprised me. Marco didn't do please. Is he here? In the car. 5 minutes of your time. That's all he's asking. Against every instinct screaming at me to run, I followed Marco to the Mercedes. The back window rolled down, and there he was. Phillips looked terrible. Thinner than I remembered. Shadows under his eyes. His usual perfect grooming slightly disheveled. But his eyes held something I'd never seen before. Desperation. Madeline, thank you for seeing me. You didn't give me much choice. What do you want, Phillips? I called off the engagement. My heart stopped. What? The wedding to Isabella. I called it off 2 weeks ago. Why would you? Because I can't do it. Can't marry someone else when you're the only person I want. Can't build a life with her when every moment would be torture thinking about you. I stared at him, afraid to hope. What about the alliance? The war you were trying to prevent? There was no war. That was my excuse. My rationalization for choosing power over you. The truth is, I was afraid. Afraid that choosing you meant losing control. Becoming vulnerable. Admitting that I needed something more than empire. Phillips, I lost everything when you left. The council turned on me, seeing my broken engagement as weakness. Rivals moved against me. My own people questioned my leadership. And I didn't care. None of it mattered without you. Tears burned my eyes. You can't just show up 3 months later and expect. I don't expect anything. I'm here to beg, to grovel, to tell you that I was wrong and stupid and so fucking terrified of losing you that I lost you anyway. He opened the car door, stepping out to stand before me in the rain. I love you, Madeline. I've loved you since Australia, maybe before, and I'm done pretending my empire matters more than my heart. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm yours, completely, if you'll have me. Not as your employer or your complicated mistake, but as a man who would burn his whole world down before losing you again. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted it so desperately it hurt. But I'd been hurt before. How do I know you won't change your mind? That your world won't demand another sacrifice and I'll be the one you offer up? You don't. I can't give you guarantees or promises that circumstances won't test us, but I can promise that I'll choose you, every time. Over power, over empire, over everything. You're my priority, Madeline. You always should have been. The rain fell harder, soaking us both. Phillips looked ridiculous in his expensive suit, drenched and desperate. The most powerful man I'd ever known, brought to his knees by love. I'm still angry, I said. You hurt me, made me feel disposable. I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you, if you'll let me. What about Isabella? She understood. Actually thanked me for being honest before it was too late. She's engaged to someone else now, someone better suited to her world. And your enemies? The families who saw you as weak? Let them try me. I'd rather face 1,000 enemies with you beside me than rule an empire alone. I looked at this man who'd consumed my thoughts for months, who'd shown me passion and vulnerability, and then shattered my heart, who was now standing in the rain, asking for a second chance. This is insane, I whispered. Completely. Say yes anyway. What exactly am I saying yes to? To me, to us, to building something real that doesn't require hiding or compromises or choosing between love and life, to figuring it out together, whatever it turns out to be. The smart thing would be to walk away, protect my already damaged heart, choose safety over the risk of being destroyed again. But I'd tried safe. I'd tried boring. And it had felt like dying slowly. "Yes," I said, and his face transformed with relief and joy, and something that looked like wonder. He pulled me into his arms, kissing me like a man starving for water. The rain poured down, and I didn't care. Didn't care that Marco was watching from the car. Didn't care that people were probably staring. Didn't care about anything except this moment, this man, this impossible second chance. "Come back with me," Phillips murmured against my lips. "Not to New York if you don't want. Anywhere you want to go. Just come back to me." "What about my job here? Quit or don't. Whatever makes you happy. I'll move here if that's what you need. I don't care where we are as long as we're together." The man who controlled an empire was offering to uproot his entire life for me. The impossibility of it made me laugh. "What's funny?" he asked, smiling against my hair. "You, us, this whole ridiculous situation. Is that a yes?" I pulled back to look at him, this complicated, dangerous, devoted man who'd somehow become essential to my existence. "Take me home, Phillips, the real home, the one we'll build together." His smile was radiant, transforming his face into something almost boyish. "The island?" "Eventually, but first." I paused, making him wait. "First, we have some rules to establish, about honesty, communication, and never making unilateral decisions that affect us both." "Demanding already? I like it." "I'm serious. Phillips, this only works if we're equals. Partners. Not boss and secretary, not protector and protected. Partners." "Partners," he agreed, and sealed it with a kiss that promised he meant it. 6 months later, I stood on the terrace of the Castellano villa, our villa now, watching the sun set over the ocean. Phillips had finalized the purchase 3 months ago, and we'd spent the past weeks making it ours. Books added to the shelves, his mother's piano installed in the living room, my writing desk positioned to catch the morning light. We'd negotiated our life together with the same intensity we brought to everything else. Brutal honesty about fears and expectations, compromises that felt less like sacrifice and more like building something better than either of us could have imagined alone. I'd returned to New York with him, but not as his secretary. Instead, I'd started my own consulting firm, advising companies on strategic acquisitions. Phillips was my first client, and the most demanding, but I'd built a roster of others. My success was mine, not borrowed from his power. We lived together in his penthouse, but I'd insisted on keeping my apartment in Portland. A safety net, I'd called it. A reminder he'd understood, that I could leave if I needed to, that choosing to stay was always a choice. "Penny for your thoughts," Phillips said, appearing behind me with 2 glasses of wine. "Thinking about how far we've come. Having regrets?" "None. You?" He pulled me back against his chest, his chin resting on my shoulder. "My only regret is waiting so long to fight for you. Letting fear drive me into making the worst decision of my life. You fixed it. I got lucky. You gave me a second chance I didn't deserve." I turned in his arms. "You earned it. By actually changing, not just promising to change." It was true. The Phillips I'd fallen in love with on this island was the same man he'd become in New York, still powerful, still commanding, but softer around the edges, more willing to delegate, to trust, to admit when he was wrong. The families had tested him, of course, pushed boundaries, looking for weakness. But Phillips had proven that strength came in many forms, that building a life with someone you loved didn't make you vulnerable, it made you dangerous in new ways. Because a man with something to lose fought harder, thought smarter, protected more fiercely. His enemies learned that lesson the hard way. "I have something for you," Phillips said, reaching into his pocket. "Close your eyes." I complied, feeling something cool and delicate settle around my wrist. When I opened my eyes, I found a platinum bracelet with a single charm, a tiny island. To remember where we found each other, he explained. The real us, without the armor. Tears pricked my eyes. It's perfect. Not quite perfect. There's supposed to be another charm, but the jeweler is still working on it. What kind of charm? His smile was mysterious. You'll see. Should be ready in about 7 months. 7 months. Something about the timeline made my breath catch. Phillips, what? He took my hand, pressing it against his chest so I could feel his heartbeat. I want to do this right this time. No pressure, no expectations. Just a question I should have asked months ago. My pulse raced as he knelt on the terrace, pulling a small velvet box from his other pocket. Madeline Jameson, you're the bravest, smartest, most infuriating woman I've ever known. You challenge me, ground me, make me want to be a better man. Will you marry me? Will you build a life with me that's messy and complicated and completely real? I looked down at this impossible man, this contradiction of danger and devotion, and felt nothing but certainty. Yes, I said, pulling him up to kiss him. Yes, 1,000 times yes. The ring was perfect, a sapphire the color of the ocean, surrounded by diamonds. He slid it onto my finger with shaking hands, and I realized he'd actually been nervous. Phillips Donovan, who faced down enemies without flinching, had been nervous about asking me to marry him. I love you, I whispered against his lips. Even when you're impossible and controlling and too stubborn for your own good. I love you too. Even when you call me on my shit and refuse to let me get away with anything. We stood there as the sun completed its descent, the sky painted in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere in New York, his empire continued without him. Deals were made, enemies plotted, allies jockeyed for position. But here, on this island, we were just two people who'd found each other against impossible odds. About that second charm, I said, playing with the island pendant. You mentioned 7 months. Did I? His expression was too innocent. Phillips. He grinned, pulling me closer. Maybe I'm planning ahead. Maybe I'm hoping that in 7 months we'll have something else worth commemorating. You can't possibly mean a baby. I want a baby with you, Madeline. Someday. When you're ready. No pressure. The thought of it, a child with his eyes and my stubbornness, made my heart swell. Someday soon? Whenever you want. I'm a patient man when it comes to things that matter. We made love that night on the terrace under the stars, the ocean providing a soundtrack of waves and wind. It felt different than before, weighted with the promise of a future we'd build together. No more secrets, no more armor, just two damaged people choosing to be vulnerable with each other. Later, wrapped in sheets and each other, Phillips traced patterns on my shoulder. I have a confession, he said quietly. Should I be worried? I bought this property before Australia, before I ever suggested the trip. I sat up, looking at him in shock. What? The acquisition was legitimate, but I could have sent anyone to evaluate it. I chose to bring you because I'd been trying to figure out how to tell you I was in love with you for 6 months. The island seemed like a place where we could both let our guards down. You manipulated me. Completely. I'm not apologizing, though. It worked. I should have been angry. Would have been once. But now I just laughed, shaking my head at his audacity. You're terrible. I'm devoted. There's a difference. Is there? He pulled me back down, kissing me thoroughly. With you? Yes. Everything I do, every decision I make, it's all with you in mind now. My world revolves around making you happy. That's a lot of pressure. You can handle it. You're the strongest person I know. Was I? I'd spent so long seeing myself as damaged, broken by Marcus's betrayal and my own poor judgment. But Phillips saw something different. Saw strength in vulnerability, power in choosing to love again despite the risk. Maybe he was right. I want to get married here, I said suddenly. On the beach. Small ceremony. Just people who actually matter. It's not a society wedding with 1,000 guests. God, no. Just us and the people we love. Rachel, Marco, a few others. Simple. Done. Whatever you want. You're getting very agreeable. I'm picking my battles. Learned that lesson the hard way. We talked until dawn, planning a future that looked nothing like either of us had imagined. A wedding on the island, splitting time between New York and Australia, building my consulting firm, eventually maybe children. I never thought I'd have this, Phillips admitted as the sky lightened. A real partnership, someone who chose me without agenda or fear. You gave me something I didn't know I needed. What's that? Hope. That I could be more than what my father's world made me. That I could choose love over power and not lose everything. You chose love, I corrected, and gained everything that actually matters. 3 months later, we married on the beach at sunset. 20 guests, a simple ceremony, vows we wrote ourselves. I promised to call him on his shit, challenge him, love him through complications. He promised to choose me, protect me, build a life that honored us both. It was perfect, imperfect, real. That night, lying in our bed with the ocean sounds drifting through open windows, I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago. Running from Derek, terrified of Phillips, convinced love was too dangerous to risk. I'd been wrong about so many things. Love was dangerous, but it was also worth every risk, every fear, every moment of vulnerability. What are you thinking about? Phillips murmured, half asleep. How lucky I am. How lucky we are. Not luck, choice. You chose me, I chose you. We keep choosing each other every day. What about tomorrow and the day after? What if we stop choosing each other? He pulled me closer, his voice absolutely certain. We won't. Because I finally found something worth fighting for beyond power or empire. I found home, and I'm never letting it go. I believed him. More importantly, I believed in us, in the partnership we'd built from broken pieces and second chances. Outside, the ocean whispered against the shore. Inside, we held each other close, two people who'd found salvation in the most unlikely place. Each other.